In January 1944, the winter skies over France are heavy with the smoke of distant artillery and the hum of propellers. Below, the crumbling remnants of a Nazi empire brace for a new kind of terror. Above, American bombers make their way toward their target, escorted by a new breed of fighter, a machine that German pilots had once dismissed as an unlikely threat. In the cockpit of a Messerschmitt Bf 109, Hauptmann Klaus Müller glances up, squinting into the icy wind, eyes searching for signs of the approaching American formation. His thoughts linger on the P-47 Thunderbolt, an aircraft his comrades had mocked, calling it clumsy, slow, and too heavy to be anything but a distraction. But as the distant hum grows louder, he begins to doubt those early dismissals. Suddenly, a flash of silver. The P-47 comes into view, diving through the cloud cover, engines screaming like a thunderstorm. The 50 caliber guns mounted on its wings are primed and ready. The moment of reckoning is upon them. The laughter had stopped. It was now time to face the storm. The P-47 Thunderbolt, an imposing war machine, was born from the need for a fighter that could both escort bombers and engage in aerial combat with the Axis forces. Developed by Republic Aviation, the Thunderbolt was a testament to American engineering, combining firepower, durability, and a design that would eventually make it one of the most feared aircraft in the skies. But in the early days of its development, there were doubts. In 1940, as the war raged in Europe, the United States was still some years away from direct involvement in the conflict. But the looming threat of Nazi Germany's expansion made it clear that the US would need to rapidly improve its military capabilities. Enter the P-47, initially seen as a stopgap between the earlier P-36 and the more refined P-51 Mustang. The aircraft's initial design featured a large, bulky airframe, with a massive radial engine and thick wings that contrasted sharply with the sleek lines of European fighters like the German Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the British Spitfire. To many, it looked cumbersome and impractical. The Thunderbolt's reputation was not helped by its performance in early test flights. Unlike the P-51, the P-47 was not built for agility. It was heavy, and early test pilots noted its lack of maneuverability. The Thunderbolt was built to be tough, a flying fortress capable of withstanding damage and continuing the fight. It could carry a vast amount of armament, an array of 8 50 caliber Browning machine guns, more than any other American fighter at the time. The sheer volume of firepower it could deliver made it a formidable adversary. But early reports from pilots, both American and European, were skeptical. The P-47's size and its heavy radial engine made it slow at high altitudes, and many of its initial engagements were less than impressive. Some considered it a brute, one whose power came at the cost of elegance and precision. The P-47 did not have the nimbleness of a Mustang or the sleek agility of a Spitfire. It was slow to climb and hard to handle in tight turns. For many, it seemed outclassed by the faster, more agile German aircraft. However, what the Thunderbolt lacked in agility, it more than made up for in its sheer durability. The P-47 was built to absorb punishment, and it could keep flying after taking significant damage that would have grounded most other aircraft. It could sustain heavy fire from enemy guns and return to base with holes in its fuselage, its wings, and even its engine. This toughness would become the P-47's defining characteristic, giving it the nickname Jug, short for Juggernaut. As American air strategies shifted, the Thunderbolt's role began to crystallize. It became the fighter escort for the growing fleets of American bombers that were bombing Nazi targets across Europe. The bombers needed protection. Air superiority was the key to ensuring the success of long-range missions. The P-47, with its immense firepower and durability, was tasked with clearing the skies of enemy aircraft, allowing the bombers to complete their missions without interference. Yet, even in this new role, it was still not considered the most efficient aircraft for dogfights. The P-51 Mustang, introduced soon after, would overshadow it in terms of agility and high-altitude performance, but the Thunderbolt was already earning its place in history. While some pilots had doubts about the P-47's performance, it became clear that the Thunderbolt's true strength lay in its ability to stay in the fight, no matter the odds. A P-47 could endure battles where other aircraft would be lost, and in the coming months, the men who flew it would see its power unleashed in a way no one could have anticipated. The skies above Nazi-occupied Europe were about to become a battleground in which the P-47 would play a pivotal role. But it would not be until it faced the full force of the Luftwaffe that its true potential would be realized. For the German Luftwaffe pilots, the arrival of the P-47 Thunderbolt over the skies of Europe in 1943 was initially met with disdain and skepticism. To them, it seemed a brute, a lumbering aircraft that could easily be picked off in a dogfight by the more nimble and aerodynamic German fighters, like the Bf 109 or Focke-Wulf 190. At first glance, the P-47 appeared to be a flying tank, slow to climb, difficult to maneuver, and too cumbersome to pose a real threat. The Luftwaffe had long dominated the skies of Europe during the early years of the war, their aircraft capable of swift and deadly engagements. The Bf 109, with its sleek design and deadly firepower, had been the pride of the Luftwaffe, a symbol of German air superiority. It was fast, agile, and equipped with a powerful armament that made it the perfect predator in the skies. Then came the P-47. In the early stages of its deployment, German pilots dismissed the Thunderbolt as an overly heavy, inefficient fighter. The P-47's high-speed dives and bombing raids were seen as a nuisance rather than a threat. Its weight and its reliance on raw firepower gave the impression that it was little more than a flying gun platform. Luftwaffe pilots, trained to outmaneuver and outfight enemy aircraft, felt little need to fear the Thunderbolt in a traditional dogfight. But the P-47 was never intended to be an agile dogfighter. Its strengths lay in its endurance and its ability to survive. Despite initial dismissals, the Thunderbolt proved to be far more dangerous than German pilots had anticipated. In combat, the P-47's thick armor and robust construction made it a tough adversary. It was not a fighter that could easily be shot down. Its design was intended for long-range missions, and its powerful, 50-caliber machine guns delivered devastating firepower, tearing apart anything in their path, including the most formidable Luftwaffe fighters. By the summer of 1943, the U.S. Army Air Forces began flying the P-47 on long-range missions over Europe, escorting B-17 Flying Fortress bombers deep into German-occupied territory. The Luftwaffe, still reeling from losses sustained during earlier confrontations, had already seen its numbers dwindle. The once feared Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf 190 were now being tasked with fighting not just the bombers, but the heavily armed escorts that accompanied them. Initially, German pilots underestimated the P-47. They didn't realize that the Thunderbolt could fly longer distances, carry more ammunition, and take far more damage than they had imagined. It quickly became clear that this wasn't just another bulky American fighter to dismiss. When confronted by the P-47, the Luftwaffe pilots began to understand the deadly seriousness of this new threat. In fact, it wasn't until the Thunderbolt came up against German pilots in combat that they started to respect the aircraft's lethality. The speed of the dive, the sheer volume of machine gun fire, and the ability to absorb hits without going down all came as a surprise to the Luftwaffe. A pivotal moment came in early 1944 during Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Normandy. As Allied bombers began their raids over German-occupied France, the Luftwaffe's best pilots scrambled to intercept. But as the German pilots dove into the sky, they found themselves faced with more than just the B-17 seconds and B-24 seconds. The P-47 seconds, now a key part of the Allied forces, were waiting for them, escorting the bombers with deadly precision. It was then, in those high-stakes dogfights over the beaches of Normandy, that the Luftwaffe pilots truly came to know the power of the P-47. German aircrews began to realize that their earlier mockery of the Thunderbolt had been gravely mistaken. The P-47's firepower, its ability to stay in the fight, and its sheer durability would soon force a major shift in the balance of power in the skies over Europe. With every engagement, the Thunderbolt proved that it could not only survive but thrive in the brutal air battles of World War II. German pilots soon learned to respect its might and feared the thunder it brought with it. For the pilots who flew the P-47 Thunderbolt, it was more than just a machine, it was a lifeline. The men who climbed into the cockpits of these aircraft were often faced with the reality that survival depended on their ability to endure the worst the sky could throw at them. The P-47 became, for many, an unexpected companion in their harrowing journey through the Second World War. Pilots who flew the Thunderbolt often had mixed feelings about their aircraft. On one hand, they found themselves in awe of its raw power. The roar of the 8.50 caliber machine guns was deafening, and the fire it sent out was unstoppable. The Thunderbolt's massive frame, though unwieldy in some respects, offered an almost comforting sense of security. Many pilots felt that if they could survive the initial onslaught of enemy fire, the P-47 would get them home. It was an aircraft designed not just to fight, but to take punishment, a feature that became vital as the Allies began to wage intense daylight bombing campaigns. On the other hand, the P-47's large size and heavy weight sometimes made it difficult to maneuver, especially in tight dogfights. Pilots who had flown more nimble aircraft like the P-51 Mustang or the Spitfire would occasionally struggle with the Thunderbolt's less forgiving handling characteristics. Yet, what it lacked in agility, it more than made up for in toughness. Its strength was in the ability to absorb hits from enemy fighters and keep flying. One pilot, Major Robert S. Johnson, who would go on to become one of the most successful P-47 aces, once said, "You could take this thing into a fight and come out of it battered, but still fly it home." As the P-47 pilots continued to fly missions over Nazi-occupied Europe, they came to understand their aircraft's strengths and weaknesses. They learned how to use the Thunderbolt's power and firepower to their advantage, launching attacks from long range and diving in with devastating precision. And when the ground crews repaired their battered planes, it became clear that the P-47 was not just an aircraft, it was an extension of the pilot's will to survive, a partner in a brutal aerial war. From a strategic standpoint, the P-47 Thunderbolt was a game-changer. When it entered service in 1943, the Allies were in the midst of ramping up their bombing campaigns against Nazi Germany. The B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator bombers, both heavy and slow, were tasked with carrying out raids over enemy territory. But these bombers were sitting ducks in the face of the Luftwaffe's elite fighters. The need for an effective fighter escort was critical. The P-47's role as a bomber escort was pivotal in the success of the Allied bombing campaign. Designed with long-range capabilities, the Thunderbolt could stay with the bombers deep into enemy territory, providing crucial protection from enemy interceptors. And as the Luftwaffe fighters emerged from the clouds, the P-47 seconds, with their heavy firepower and near-indestructible build, began to make a major impact. The true advantage of the P-47, however, wasn't just its ability to protect the bombers, it was its offensive capabilities. Equipped with a range of bombs and rockets in addition to its 8.50 caliber guns, the Thunderbolt could engage ground targets with devastating efficiency. This versatility allowed P-47 pilots to support a variety of missions, from strategic bombing to ground attacks. In some cases, the Thunderbolt's ability to perform close air support missions made it invaluable for troops on the ground. However, the Thunderbolt's effectiveness wasn't limited to its offensive power. It was also instrumental in the battle for air superiority. As the Allies continued to push forward, the P-47 began to take on the role of a heavy interceptor, engaging German bombers and fighters alike. The P-47's ability to absorb damage and keep fighting proved crucial in this phase of the war. It wasn't uncommon for pilots to return to base with their aircraft riddled with bullet holes, but still able to fly home. This resilience made it a stalwart presence in the skies, slowly chipping away at the Luftwaffe's strength. The P-47 Thunderbolt's technological innovations were key to its success on the battlefield. Its robust design and powerful armament set it apart from its contemporaries, making it not just a fighter, but a symbol of technological might. At the core of the Thunderbolt's strength was its engine, a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp radial engine. With a horsepower rating of 2,000, this powerful engine allowed the P-47 to achieve speeds in excess of 400 miles per hour, a crucial factor when engaging fast German aircraft. The Thunderbolt's airframe was large, bulky, and designed to carry the engine and armament necessary for its missions. The P-47 was the heaviest piston-engine fighter ever built, weighing nearly 15,000 pounds fully loaded. But that weight came with its advantages. The Thunderbolt's thick skin and tough construction made it nearly indestructible. Its durable fuselage and wings could withstand fire from enemy aircraft, and the cockpit was well armored, providing the pilot with an unusual degree of protection. The true power of the P-47 lay in its firepower. Equipped with 8 50-caliber Browning M2 machine guns, the Thunderbolt could unleash a devastating volume of fire. Each of these machine guns was capable of firing over 1,000 rounds per minute, and with 8 of them, the P-47 had the ability to saturate the air with lead, creating a formidable threat to anything that came within range. This firepower made the Thunderbolt especially effective against bombers, whose vulnerable sections could be shredded by the P-47's guns. The P-47 also had the ability to carry rockets and bombs, turning it into an effective ground attack fighter. But it wasn't just the guns that made the P-47 a technological marvel. It was also its ability to survive in the harshest combat environments. The Thunderbolt could sustain battle damage and still keep flying, an attribute that became crucial during long-range escort missions. German fighters often fired relentlessly at American bombers, but the P-47 could absorb hits from enemy machine guns and still return to base, a feature that saved countless lives. Perhaps the most remarkable feature of the Thunderbolt was its ability to fight in all conditions. Its heavy airframe, though not nimble, allowed it to be effective at low altitudes, where its firepower could devastate enemy aircraft. At higher altitudes, while it wasn't as fast or maneuverable as the Bf-109 or Focke-Wulf 190, its sheer durability made it a tough adversary. In essence, the P-47's technology was designed to ensure one thing above all else: survivability. For the pilots who flew it, that meant a better chance of making it home. The success of the P-47 Thunderbolt in combat was not solely due to the aircraft itself. It was also the result of the strategic thinking and leadership that guided its deployment. The men in charge of directing the U.S. Army Air Forces during World War II were quick to recognize the strengths and weaknesses of different aircraft, including the P-47, and used them in the most effective ways possible. The introduction of the P-47 into the European theater was part of a broader shift in American air strategy. As the Allies pushed into Europe, it became clear that air superiority was key to achieving victory. The U.S. Air Forces, under leaders like General H. Arnold and Major General James Doolittle, developed a strategy that relied heavily on the P-47's strengths in long-range escort missions and ground attacks. The P-47 was seen as the perfect tool for the role of bomber escort. Its heavy firepower and durability made it ideal for defending the B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator bombers from the relentless attacks of the Luftwaffe. Under Doolittle's leadership, the Allies began to concentrate their forces and launched a sustained bombing campaign against German industrial centers. With the P-47's ability to withstand damage, it became the ideal companion for these bombers, accompanying them deep into enemy territory. But the P-47's role extended beyond just escort missions. The leadership of the U.S. Air Forces recognized that the Thunderbolt could also be an effective offensive weapon, particularly against enemy ground targets. The aircraft's ability to carry bombs and rockets allowed it to perform low-level ground attack missions, disrupting German supply lines and destroying infrastructure. This dual-role capability made the P-47 one of the most versatile aircraft in the Allied arsenal. Under the leadership of experienced commanders, the P-47 evolved into a force that could adapt to the changing demands of the battlefield. Its design was refined through combat experience, and its role in the war expanded. By the time of the D-Day landings in June 1944, the Thunderbolt had become a cornerstone of the Allied air strategy, its leadership and versatility playing a crucial role in the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany. The date was the 6th of June 1944. The world held its breath as the Allied forces launched Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy, which would become the turning point in World War II. On the ground, thousands of soldiers stormed the beaches, fighting for their lives. But in the skies above, a different kind of battle was unfolding, one that would change the course of history. The Luftwaffe was struggling. Its numbers had been decimated over the years, and by 1944, the once feared German Air Force was a shadow of its former self. Still, the skies over Normandy were not without threat. The German Luftwaffe, though diminished, still had formidable fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf 190. As the Allied bombers and their escorts began to make their way over France, the Luftwaffe scrambled to intercept. For the American pilots flying the P-47 Thunderbolt, this was no ordinary mission. They were not just facing the threat of German fighters, they were part of a larger, high-stakes operation that could change the fate of the war. The stakes had never been higher. The P-47 pilots, many of whom had been flying combat missions for over a year, knew that this would be one of the most important days of their lives. Their role was simple: protect the bombers and clear the skies of enemy fighters. But as they encountered the German aircraft, the P-47's formidable reputation would be put to the ultimate test. The Luftwaffe pilots, still believing the P-47 to be an awkward, unthreatening adversary, engaged with confidence. They thought they could outmaneuver the Thunderbolts in their lighter, faster aircraft. But as they dove into combat, they quickly realized how wrong they were. The Thunderbolt, though not as agile as the Bf 109 or Focke-Wulf, had a presence in the skies that was hard to ignore. Its heavy armament tore through enemy formations with terrifying precision. The P-47's 50 caliber machine guns unleashed a wall of lead, shredding enemy fighters that tried to dive into attack. One of the defining moments of the battle came when a squadron of German fighters attacked a group of American bombers escorted by P-47 seconds. The Thunderbolts dove into action, engaging the German aircraft with a level of ferocity that few had expected. In the ensuing dogfights, the German pilots quickly discovered that the P-47 was not just a bullet sponge, it was a deadly fighter in its own right. The 50 caliber guns ripped through the German fighters, and the Thunderbolt's durability allowed it to take damage and keep fighting. German pilots who had once dismissed the P-47 as a slow, clumsy target now faced the reality of its lethal capabilities. The skies above Normandy became a battleground, with P-47 seconds cutting down the Luftwaffe's last remaining hopes of halting the Allied invasion. The Thunderbolt's firepower, toughness, and endurance overwhelmed the German air forces, marking the beginning of the end for Nazi control over the skies. In the hours that followed, as more German aircraft were shot down and the tide of battle turned against them, it became clear that the P-47 had proven itself in the most brutal of circumstances. The days of German pilots laughing at the Thunderbolt were over. It had shown them, and the world, that it was a force to be reckoned with. Its 50 caliber machine guns had rained down a storm of lead on the Luftwaffe, forever changing the dynamics of air combat. As the days following D-Day stretched into weeks, the P-47 Thunderbolt continued to play a decisive role in the Allied offensive. The Luftwaffe, already decimated by years of attrition, was now struggling to hold back the tide of Allied air superiority. The American pilots, armed with the knowledge that the P-47 had proven itself in battle, began to exploit its full potential, pushing the German forces ever closer to the breaking point. The Thunderbolt's greatest strength lay in its adaptability. Not only was it capable of holding its own in high-stakes dogfights against the Luftwaffe's best, but it could also engage in ground attack missions with devastating efficiency. The P-47 began to target key German infrastructure, attacking supply lines, military vehicles, and even enemy artillery positions. The thunderous roar of the P-47's engines became a signature sound of the Allied assault. Its bombs and rockets hammered the enemy, while its machine guns tore through enemy planes, leaving destruction in their wake. In the critical weeks following the Normandy landings, the P-47's dominance in the skies contributed to the collapse of the Luftwaffe's ability to defend its airspace. German fighter squadrons, already stretched thin by constant losses, could no longer mount a sustained defense against the onslaught of Allied bombers and escorts. The P-47 seconds were everywhere, protecting the bombers, engaging enemy fighters, and wreaking havoc on the ground. The Luftwaffe had been unable to replace its lost aircraft, and morale among German pilots was at an all-time low. One of the defining engagements occurred during the Battle of the Falaise Pocket, where Allied forces encircled and destroyed a large portion of the German army. Here, the P-47 seconds played a pivotal role in the final stages of the battle, providing air support that effectively sealed the fate of the German forces. As the German retreat began, the P-47 seconds descended from the skies, targeting retreating German columns, command posts, and logistical hubs. It was an unrelenting, crushing force, one that left the Luftwaffe's once proud fighter pilots with little chance of survival. By the end of the summer of 1944, the Luftwaffe had suffered catastrophic losses. Pilots had been killed in large numbers, and the German Air Force was incapable of mounting effective counterattacks. The P-47 Thunderbolt had not only withstood the test of battle, but had dominated the skies, leaving its mark as one of the most powerful weapons in the Allied arsenal. For the pilots who flew the P-47, this victory represented more than just a tactical triumph. It was a personal vindication. The aircraft that had once been mocked by their enemies was now a symbol of the turning tide in the war. In dogfights over France, the P-47 had proven itself to be an instrument of destruction, a reliable companion in battle, and an indomitable force in the skies. As the Luftwaffe continued to crumble and the Allies pushed deeper into Nazi-occupied Europe, the Thunderbolt's legacy was cemented. The days of German pilots laughing at the P-47 had long passed. The Thunderbolt's 8.50 caliber machine guns had silenced their doubts, and the roar of its engines would echo through the history of the war as a symbol of unrelenting strength and resilience. By the fall of 1944, the Allied forces were rapidly advancing through Western Europe, and the Luftwaffe was in complete disarray. The battle for air superiority had been decisively won, and the P-47 Thunderbolt played a critical role in achieving that victory. The P-47 had far surpassed the initial expectations placed upon it. What had once been regarded as a clumsy, slow fighter was now recognized as a key component of the Allied success in Europe. The loss of the Luftwaffe's air superiority had profound implications for the German war effort. Without control of the skies, the German forces were severely hampered in their ability to protect critical infrastructure, defend key cities, and support ground operations. The relentless strikes from Allied bombers, often escorted by P-47 seconds, obliterated supply lines, factories, and military installations, leaving the German war machine increasingly crippled. P-47 pilots had become not only bomber escorts, but relentless pursuers of the remaining German aircraft, chasing them from the skies. The Luftwaffe's collapse was a direct result of the constant pressure applied by the Thunderbolts. The German pilots had no respite. The Allies had the upper hand. The Thunderbolt, with its toughness, firepower, and versatility, made the Luftwaffe's once feared fighters seem insignificant by comparison. The relentless pressure from P-47 escorts forced German pilots to face an enemy they could not outrun or outmaneuver. The tide of war had irrevocably shifted, and the Luftwaffe could no longer keep pace. By late 1944, as the Allies advanced towards the German borders, the Luftwaffe's losses were staggering. The German pilots had become disillusioned, and the Luftwaffe could not replenish its ranks with the trained personnel necessary to continue the fight. The P-47's role in this collapse cannot be overstated. It had become an essential part of the broader strategy of destroying Germany's ability to fight, and it succeeded in its mission. The Thunderbolt's legacy was one of both triumph and transformation. It had exceeded all expectations, cementing its place in the pantheon of great wartime aircraft. The P-47's combination of firepower, durability, and versatility allowed it to adapt to different roles, from bomber escort to ground attack and air superiority. It became the go-to fighter for the Allied air forces in Europe and helped ensure the success of strategic bombing campaigns, as well as the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany. As the war drew to a close, the P-47's role was diminished in favor of newer, more advanced aircraft like the P-51 Mustang, which had superior high-altitude performance. However, the Thunderbolt's contributions could not be overlooked. It had played a decisive role in the liberation of Europe and had done so at a great cost. Thousands of American pilots and ground crew had risked their lives to keep the P-47 flying. Many had paid the ultimate price, but their sacrifice had helped secure the future of their nation and the world. The P-47 Thunderbolt's ability to withstand incredible damage, survive long missions, and engage effectively in a variety of combat scenarios made it one of the most formidable fighters of World War II. Its rugged design, which had once been mocked, was now seen as a symbol of resilience, a testament to the strength and spirit of those who flew it. In the years following the war, the Thunderbolt's reputation would endure. It remained in service for some time after World War II and became a symbol of the unwavering determination and courage of the pilots who flew it. The stories of those who flew the P-47 tales of perseverance, camaraderie, and sacrifice would continue to inspire future generations. The aircraft's contribution to the Allied victory was immeasurable. The P-47 Thunderbolt may have started as an underdog, but by the end of World War II, it had proven itself as one of the most effective and beloved fighters in the skies. In a war where everything was uncertain and every mission could be your last, the P-47 provided its pilots with something they desperately needed: the belief that they could survive and that the enemy could be defeated. The roar of the Thunderbolt's engines may have quieted after the war, but its legacy lived on, not just in history books or war museums, but in the memories of those who flew it and fought beneath it. It had helped turn the tide of war, and in doing so, had secured a place in the annals of aviation history that would endure for generations to come. The P-47 Thunderbolt was more than just an aircraft. It was a symbol of the relentless spirit of those who flew it. In an era defined by technological innovation, it was a testament to the power of design forged by necessity, a machine built to endure, to protect, and to deliver justice from the skies. When the war ended, the P-47 was no longer the object of derision it had once been. It had earned its place as one of the most successful and feared fighters of the Second World War. But the Thunderbolt's true legacy was not just in its firepower or its endurance, but in the lives it saved, the missions it completed, and the countless moments where, against overwhelming odds, it showed that sheer resilience could turn the tide of battle. For those who flew it, the P-47 was both a lifeline and a partner. It was the machine they trusted when the skies were filled with death. And when they returned to base, often battered, sometimes wounded, they knew that they had faced the best the enemy had to offer, and survived. It was a reminder that war is not only fought with weapons and tactics, but with the strength of the human spirit. In a conflict that brought untold destruction to the world, the P-47 Thunderbolt became a force of resistance, standing firm against the overwhelming darkness of war. The men who flew the P-47 were as much a part of its legacy as the aircraft itself. They faced unimaginable dangers, dogfights at the edge of the stratosphere, bombing runs through flak-filled skies, and long hours over enemy territory, and yet they remained unbroken. Many never made it home. Those who did were forever changed, bound together by the shared experience of flying a machine that embodied endurance in its purest form. The P-47's thunder may have faded from the skies, but its story is one of victory, of transformation, and of the power of survival. It is a reminder that in the darkest of times, strength comes not just from the technology at hand, but from the courage and determination of those who choose to fight. In the end, the P-47 Thunderbolt was a symbol of defiance, the roar of its engines, a testament to the unyielding will of those who dared to fly it.